Hi, this is Denise Mathew, and today I'm going to make these boho style earrings. You could use whatever color beads you want and change it up as much as you like. There's a lot of versatility in the design. It will take a little bit of time to make, but the effort is definitely worth it. So let's get started. I've already made one earring, and I'm just going to match the earring that I'm going to make to the one I've already made. So I'm using 3 inches of 18 gauge wire, and all I'm going to do is just bend it in the middle, just so it's even on both sides. Because I'm making the second earring, I'm going to have to keep comparing it to my first earring so that they're even. That means it's going to take a little bit more time to make the earring because you want to shape it exactly the same as the other one as much as possible. Once I have a rough shape, I'm going to curl down the edges, so just making 2 loops on the end, and that's going to be where the ear wire will go so you can wear it. So that's just 1 loop, and then try and make them even as possible, and then your second loop. You can start to shape the frame with your fingers, but if you happen to have a dowel or even a ring mandrel that you can shape it on, it will make it easier to make the earrings uniform. So I'm just going to compare the frames one more time, and they're getting much closer. So now this would be the time where I'm going to hammer it. Now this isn't essential, but if you want to, this will give it a little bit more wire hardening, and it will make it stiffer and it'll hold its shape better. When I'm hammering, I first use the flat side of the hammer, and once I have it nice and flat, then I just flip over the hammer and use the ball peen side, and that will give you that sort of hammered look. It's not necessary, as I said before. If you work with a stiffer wire, you won't have to do this. If you do decide to hammer, you might have to readjust the frame a little bit to get it back in shape. And what you want to do is you want to sort of tilt the loops outwards, because that's where the ear wire is going to be, and you want to have it so it kind of is closer together than the frame, so it'll be easy. You don't want the ear wire to be too long. So I'm just going to do a final check to make sure it's exactly right. And it looks pretty good, so now I'm going to start putting the beads on. I'm working with a 24 gauge wire, about 1.5 feet, and you can adjust that according to how much you need. It's better to err on the side of having more than less, because you might run out and that makes it difficult. You might need to use a smaller gauge wire, and that's just based on the beads that you're using. So all you're going to do is start on one side and then start to wrap around a few times. So usually I wrap around once or twice on the longer wire side, and then after that I'll wrap in the tail, and it ends up being about 4 wraps, but again, you can have more or less according to what you want to do. And then just take your chain nose pliers and push them together so they're nice and neat. If the wires slide down a little bit, don't worry, just push them back up closer to the loops. They will end up staying in place a lot better once you start adding beads. I'm working with 3mm turquoise rondelles. I think it's a Sleeping Beauty, but you could use round beads if you like. As long as they're about 3 to 4 millimeters, that's a pretty good size. You could go bigger, but you probably would have to adjust your frames to make them a little bit bigger. So after I've wrapped one bead on, I'm going to wrap 2.5 times before I put the next bead on. So it's 1 and then 2. And then the third time, it's only halfway, and then you would add your bead. Now keep that pattern up the whole way around, except for when you're going to add your pear-shaped bead in the center. So 1 and 2, and then halfway around, up again. And that will keep your beads all on the same side. So just add your third bead the same way. And as you go along, you can adjust everything. If it's sliding down, you can push it back up and push all your loops together so they're nice and neat. So I'm going to add 5 beads on one side, and then I'll add the pear-shaped bead, and then I'll add 5 beads on the other side. Again, you could go with more or less beads on each side. It's up to you completely. So now I'm just going to make the center briolette bead. I'm using a 10 by 5 carnelian and 24 gauge wire. So I just put the wire through. So I'm leaving a little tail, and I'm just going to bend that wire at the tip of the briolette bead. It's straight up. So the top is hugging the top of the briolette, and then it's angled out a little bit. And then just match the other side so that the top of the bead is framed in the wires. Now if one wire is a little too long, you can just trim it back like I just did. And now you're just going to do a little loop on top. I'm going to match it against the other bead I just wrapped to make sure that they're the same height. And it looks good. So now I'm going to continue wrapping down. Just grab hold of that loop with my chain nose pliers, and then start to wrap down the 2 wires together. I'm going to do a rustic wrap, but if you prefer to use less wire and just wrap it down once, that will work out perfectly. Once I get to the top of the bead, I want to make sure that it's nice and straight, so that's why I like to take it in my fingers and do it. Some people might still hold it with their pliers, but I prefer to use my fingers. So now just wrap down as far as you like. Usually I wrap down about a third of the bead. And that, like I said, if you wanted to, you could trim it back right now. But since I'm making a rustic wrap, I'm going to continue to wrap down all the way, and now I'm starting to go up. And what you're doing is you're bulking up the wrap so it's a little bit bulkier, a little bit messier looking. And I think it looks really nice with the boho type of earring. So you're going to wrap right to the top of your loop. And then when you get up top, you're just going to trim back that wire. And then just trim it back. And then you can tuck in that stray bit of wire so that it doesn't pull on your clothes. And then your briolette's ready to go. So now you're just going to add that charm onto the wire that you've already been working with. I've wrapped 2.5 times already, and now I'm going to wrap 2.5 more times. Now I'm going to add another bead and start the other side. 2.5 wraps in between each bead, and keep adding beads. And if you notice, I have cut my wire too short, so now I'm going to show you how to add wire if you've done a mistake like me. Ideally, you want to have more wire than less, but I think it's a good way to show that I make mistakes too, and this is how I fix them. I'm able to add one more bead, and now I'm going to have to add some more wire. I'm going to wrap it as much as I can to secure it, and once it's secured, then I'll be able to add the wire. So you're going to attach the wire exactly like you did in the beginning, except you're just going to do maybe 1 or 2 wraps, It may be a little bit uneven, but it'll still be perfectly fine because all the loops are pretty close together anyhow. Instead of wrapping in that tail, I'm just going to trim it back instead. And then just push those loops down. And then I can start adding my beads again. If it's still a bit loose, that's all right. It will eventually tighten up, but you can also just squeeze it with your pliers to make it a little bit more tight. I'm just going to add some more beads. So just continue on until you're adding all the beads you need to, which would make it 5. And once you add the 5th bead, then you're just going to wrap the same amount of wraps you did when you started. So now trim back the excess wire and then tuck in the wire to make sure there's no sharp edges. Earrings and adjust it accordingly to make sure that they're as close to being the same as possible. There may be a little deviation, but usually it's pretty close enough. To make the ear wire, I'm going to use a 20 gauge wire. 1.5 inches seems to be a good amount. If you need to use more or less, you can adjust it accordingly, but basically you just want it to spring in and out of the loops so that you can wear it easily. I like to use my wire straightening pliers to wire harden the ear wire a little bit. You want it to be as stiff as possible so that it's going to stay in your ear and it's not going to lose its shape. So I just make a little loop on one end. Then I'm just going to shape it on a Sharpie or a marker or any kind of pen will work. So you're just going to put the loop so it's up, facing up, and then just bend down around the Sharpie. Now you're just going to open that loop sideways and then just attach it to one side of the loops. Usually there's a prettier side of your wrapping. You can just pick which one you like better and then just do a little bit of an angled edge on the end, a sort of 90-degree angle. And now you want to finish the end of the ear wire so that it doesn't hurt your ear when you try and put it on. I'm using a rounder tool. You can also use just a regular jewelry file, or the other thing you can use is a plain old nail file. Either way, just file it until it feels like there's no sharp edges and it's ready to go. When you make your ear wire, you want it to be wider than the opening for the frame because you want to have a little spring back. So if you notice, I had to push back and that will make a spring back. And I'm going to make the angle a little bit more 90 degrees so it's going to stay in there a little bit better. But you really need that spring in order to keep it in your ear. And this is the final check of the earrings to make sure that they're the same and they look pretty good. So that would be it. So this concludes the tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. We'll see you next time. Thanks for coming. Bye for now.